Hello, welcome back to 10,000 Steps with Baby. Thank you for joining. This is episode 7 now of 10,000 Steps with Baby. And today I'm going to be talking about returning to work after maternity leave. So, I don't know why this has been in my head this week, especially as I am very, very lucky and I'm not going back to work until next September when Alba will be just over a year old. I think it came as such a shock to me when I had to go back to work after James was born. A year of maternity leave initially felt like a really long time. And in my head, when he was one, I thought he would not be a tiny baby anymore and I would be ready to leave him at nursery and go back to my job. And of course, as with all things to do with babies and being a parent, it was way more complicated than that. And I don't want to complain about only having a year. I know many, many people, especially in other countries like the US, where paid maternity leave isn't common, or you might have financial reasons for needing to go back quickly, or there's loads of personal reasons, or maybe it made more sense for your partner if you have one to do the maternity or paternity leave. Anyway, I don't want to complain about the length of time. I was very, very lucky. It's just that even though I spent many, many days wishing away my maternity leave, and when there was 8 completely full stone cold cups of coffee around the house, and I was so bored of singing the same bloody nursery rhymes, and I suddenly got to my last month of maternity leave and I was like, wait, where did that time go? It's only been about 2 minutes. And like I said, when James was born, I thought that one was quite old. Like he wouldn't need me so much and would be ready for nursery and being in a new social environment. And when he got to one, I realized that he was still really a baby. He still needed me lots and he looked impossibly small and out of his depth when we went in to our nursery settling in sessions. Um, so yeah, nursery. We'd signed James up to a large chain nursery that was closest to our house, and their settling in policy was you came into the room with them for maybe 20 minutes, then went and sat in the waiting room for another 20 minutes, and then you came back. And then the next day, you dropped them off for 2 hours and you left. And then after that, if everything was going well, then they started full time. And in their experience, they told us that it was better to go in rapidly rather than sort of drawing it all out. And that first session was fine. It was painful to leave him, but I was only going 20 yards down the corridor. And I was thinking, oh, well, hey, first free time in forever tomorrow. What am I going to do with my free 2 hours? But tomorrow came, and that feeling of passing over my tiny little boy to strangers as he desperately clung to me and cried, and it was like having a piece of my heart ripped out. I sat in my car in the nursery car park and bawled my eyes out for 2 hours. And then I rushed back in after 1 hour and 59 minutes, and the staff told me that he'd been great, a little upset at first, but fine, that he had these little pink eyes, and I just thought, what am I going to do? I absolutely hate this, but I need to go back to work. So I got home and I told Jack that he needed to make enough money by next week that I never needed to go back to work, but also we needed a full time nanny because at the same time I didn't want to be a full time mum. And I would probably want to do a couple of hours of work at my job here and there, but only if it involved never leaving James. And instead of making this come true, he said that he would do nursery drop offs from that point. And of course, slowly things did get better. It was a massive adjustment for both of us. We'd never spent a day apart. I'd only been away from him for a few hours here and there, and Jack doing the drop off did help, as he was probably sensing a lot of my anxiety and trepidation, even though I was putting up a good front about being positive and breezy about drop off. But yeah, I think doing it with Jack was better for everyone. Um, he started in the baby room, and he was in there for I think for about 4 months before he got moved up to the toddler room. And In the baby room, he seemed impartial, not sad, but I wouldn't say he was happy to be there. I think it was just quite a chaotic room just because they were all very small and there was a very big age range. There was a 3 month old, and oldest kids in that room were 16 months. And when he moved up to the bigger room, he did start running in very happily. The staff in there were really lovely and they were doing slightly more grown up activities like messy play, which he loved. And after that, each time he moved up a room, it was always fine. There was always a bit of an adjustment, but he was always happy in nursery. So it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be in those first few days. Um, so that was the nursery side of things. But then there was me going back to work. And I'm a doctor in Manchester and I'm in a training program. So in a couple more years of training, I'll be a consultant in infectious diseases and microbiology. But when you're in training, you usually rotate to a different hospital in your area every year. So I was moving to a new hospital, which was only about 10 miles away, but it was going to take me an hour and a half commute each way. So I was suddenly going to a 3 hour commute. And I was like, how am I going to juggle everything? Because being a mum, you might not get paid for it, but it's a full time job. And now I was going back to my other job and I would be doing on call shifts and weekend shifts. And I was thinking, okay, millions of mums, parents do this, but how? And so I asked around, my friends and people who had done this before for their advice. And a key thing that people said over and over to me is you just have to be so organized. You can wing things when it's just you to get out of the house in the morning and you can jump in the shower and be out the door in 10 minutes, but that just doesn't work with kids. So I was down with that. My brain thrives on having a routine, a structure, a plan. A therapist would probably tell me to be more easygoing and relaxed, but that isn't me. And to be fair, this way of thinking did make the whole returning to work thing so much easier. So here's some things I did. One, Gusto meal boxes for dinner. We have used Gusto for years now, and I think they're great. This isn't sponsored. There's loads of meal choices, and they do lots of 10 and 20-minute meals, so they're really handy for if you need to rush home and get a quick dinner made. And it also just takes away the having to think of what to make and buy the food. So that we would order 4 nights worth of food, and that would be a big chunk of the week sorted. Number two is we did a Tesco delivery every 2 weeks for all the basic items and breakfast and all things you need. Again, it saves you time having to spend your whole Saturday traipsing around Tesco with a baby. Just rubbish. You want to be able to enjoy your weekend. And sort of similar for number three, I stocked up before I started work on all the really boring things like laundry detergent and toilet paper and bin bags. So I knew that that was all covered and I didn't have to use any extra brain power thinking about those things or having a nightmare one day as I realised I've got no clean clothes and I've run out of washing powder and having to be, I just did that. So it was sorted for I think a good couple of months. Number four, I got given the Even Easier Slow Cooker recipe book, which I really rate. The recipes are really great and they're really delicious, the ones that I've made. And I'd usually choose one of those to make a week. The other great thing about it is it's not one of those slow cooker books where you have to brown the chicken or fry off the onions and then add them in. You can just chuck all your ingredients in the pan and turn it on and forget about it. And that's what I would use to make my lunches for the week. So that was just sort of done and I didn't have to try and make something the night before or spend a fortune buying it at work. Number five, the laundry was insane. James would come home absolutely filthy each day from nursery, which I was really happy about because it meant he was having fun and getting stuck in. But he'd usually go through a couple of outfits and he'd often pour porridge on my first outfit of the day before I left. So we easily had a load to do every day. But I found out that our machine has a delay time on it. So I got into the habit of putting it on every night and having it set to start at 6 a.m. so I could get up in the morning and hang it up before I left for work. Or if I didn't have time, I'd get Jack to do it. But it kept on top of the laundry that way. It meant we didn't have piles and piles of it to be doing at the weekend. And number six, this worked when we had the luxury of one kid. I don't know how it's going to work when there's Now there's two kids and we've got to have one each at all times. But when it was just the three of us, one of us would take turns, we'd put James to bed, and the other one would do the dishes, tidy the kitchen, pack James's nursery bag, and put out his clothes for the next day. And that 100%, that extra 20 minutes that took made the mornings feel less chaotic. They were still, of course, super chaotic, even with all that planning, but it would have been much, much worse if we hadn't done those things. And it meant we weren't spending the morning running around looking for socks or realizing there was no clean bowls or whatever. So yeah, that was a really good habit that we got into. So that was some of the practical things we did. If anyone has any other ideas, then let me know. I love doing all these sorts of things. It calms my soul. It makes makes me happy. However sad that is, but yeah. And from an emotional point of view, there was the practical side, but yeah, from an emotional side, that was of course harder. I was so excited on my first day back at work. It felt great to be putting on my work clothes and getting on the bus with all the other commuters with my coffee. But I think I cried in the toilets twice on my first day because I missed James so much. And we have this app for the nursery where they post little updates about what they've eaten and with little photos. And I must have refreshed that about 1,000,000 times those first couple of days. It was so hard not to know what he was doing every second of every day and not being a part of that anymore. Another really hard part was that James was so knackered from nursery in his first few weeks that he was falling asleep at 6:30. And like I said, it was taking me an hour and a half to get home, so I would be sprinting out the door of work at 5 p.m. on the dot and desperately trying to find a faster way to get home so that I could see him before he went to sleep. Because otherwise I would sometimes only have half an hour with him in the morning and that would be it for the whole day. I still, of course, saw him all through the night while he woke up, but it's not the same thing. But there was loads of positives. Being at work felt like such a break from the chaos of being at home with a kid. I got to make myself coffees and actually drink them. I could go to the toilet when I wanted. It was really nice to talk to adults and to, switch on a part of my brain that had been asleep for the past year. I did feel like a total imposter for about 6 weeks as my brain just wasn't used to functioning in this way. And I had to ask people to pretty much explain my job to me every day and get lots of extra help. But everyone was really supportive and quite quickly I felt sort of back in the groove again, like, oh yeah, I do know this. So if you're returning to work soon, then good luck. I know it's daunting and there's a lot of conflicting emotions, but it will be fine, I promise. As usual, if anyone has any comments or suggestions, and I'd love to hear them, what made your life easier when you returned to work? I hope you'll join again next week. And if you haven't already, then please subscribe and follow on whatever podcast platform you're using. All right, have a great rest of your week. Bye.